All right, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you all to this fine morning?
Great.
Awesome. This is really fairly informal, other than questions. I know you all have questions, right? Why would you be here otherwise? So my request is if you could write your questions down, because I believe that I'll get you your answers before we're done today. If not, I'll stick around and you can come talk to me and I'll make sure that we go through them. Is that fair? Yes. And the reason for that is just because I know some of you have plans this afternoon and we want to make sure we honor everyone's time and we can get in and get out on time. All right. Okay, so first of all, who am I? My name is Werner Marksfeld. You can read about who I am and all my background and all the letters behind my name. I don't think that really matters as much as my story, which is what I want to start out with. The first question I always ask myself, well, why do I do this? Why do I get up in front of people and do this? How many of you like doing public speaking? Really? Very few of you. Most of us don't like it, but I've done it for a while now and I've gotten really comfortable with it. But there's a reason why I do this. And the story begins approximately 12 years ago. I was in my office seeing patients, and a local police officer walks into my office who was not a patient. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime a police officer either pulls me over or walks in, you don't know who they are, I don't know, I got nervous. Is that okay? Yeah. I don't know. So he says, Werner, I need to speak to you in private. And I knew something wasn't right. I knew something was wrong. And so we went to a private room, and he said, I need you to sit down. Okay. He says, I just got a call from the RCMP, which is the Federal Canadian Police. I am Canadian. Please do not hold that against me. And he proceeded to tell me that they got a call that they had found my father who had committed suicide. And you're probably asking yourself, why am I telling you the story about my father and him committing suicide? What has that got to do with you? Or what has it got to do with this subject? Well, the story actually begins, like I said, a little over 12 years ago. My father had a thyroid issue, and he had an overactive thyroid. Now, most people that we deal with are more hypo, as an underactive, and most are either Hashimoto's or some variation of an autoimmunity. In his case, he had an overactive thyroid. By the way, that happens a lot of times with hypothyroidism. It's hyperactive, and then it goes hypo. It burns out. And so they did all kinds of different things. Ultimately, what do they typically do if you have an overactive thyroid? Does anybody know? They remove it, right. And that's what they did. And as a result of that, he obviously had to do what? Take medication. I mean, he had no choice. And his behaviors and who he was and his charisma and all the things that really, he was a very smart man. He spoke 8 languages. He was very charismatic. He had a PhD in economics. And all of a sudden, this person who was so outgoing and everybody loved turned to this really toxic person. It was embarrassing to be with him in public. Moods would swing, highs and lows. And I believe that to a certain point, when you choose to take your life, you're in a state of psychosis, right? Who wants to really take their life unless you feel like there's no end in sight? And so from this deep pain was birthed the purpose. And that's what I do. I went on a mission 10 years ago because, again, I was in alternative healthcare, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled with what I was doing. I knew there was something better. And after this experience, I said, look, there's got to be a better way. And so that's when my story began. And I went on a quest to find a better way to serving people who have, in particular, thyroid. But you'll learn today, we're going to talk a lot about new millennium diseases, which includes, of course, thyroid issues, diabetes, and various other autoimmune conditions that don't even have a label yet. They don't even have a diagnosis, but they manifest as an autoimmune. And autoimmune is huge. You're going to learn today that over 90% of the time, if you have some type of a thyroid issue, you actually have an autoimmune version to that. So it's going to be really insightful for you. Yeah, there's that picture. Again, like I said, from this pain was birthed the purpose. And so that's my story, and that's why I do what I do, and I love what I do. I'm very picky with who I work with because I only want to work with people who really want to get well. I don't want to work with people who make all kinds of excuses. Can you know those people? Right? Yeah, none of you, of course, right? You're all like, none of those kind of people. And so because I want you to get the best and the most out of today's seminar, I want to really touch on why you are here today. When I sit down with a client, the first initial appointment is 2 hours. What's a typical visit with a physician?
7 minutes.
7 minutes. Well, she knows it to the exact minute. 7, 10, 15, maybe 20 if you're lucky, right? Everybody agree with that? Okay. So part of that first 2 hours, I want to sit down and hear why you're there, why you're here. I want to know what is going on in your life and what you want to see change. That is the first and most important thing we need to understand. Would you agree? Because ultimately getting there, the journey is not as important as achieving that goal. Now granted, it has to be ethical, it has to be moral, it has to be legal, all of that matters. But most importantly, your goals matter, so do your goals, not my agenda. Does that make sense? So the same applies here today. I really want to get some of you to really just give me your why. Why are you here today? Other than I just want to learn some information. There's got to be more to it than that. And you can get into specifics. This is what's going on with my life. These are the things that are going on. These are the symptoms I'm suffering with. These are my frustrations that I have with doctors or healthcare providers. And I'm really looking for an alternative. So who is brave enough to share? Yes, I'll start with you. Well, both of you. We'll start with this young lady.
I have a thyroid disorder that I don't know much about, but I have a bald spot the size of my fist on my head.
Okay.
And I know thyroid disorder can cause hair loss.
Okay. So just to summarize, hair loss in an unknown form or concern as it relates to your thyroid. Is that correct? So we'll just say question mark thyroid. And I say that because how many of you have been to your doctor and you've done the blood work, it comes back normal, and yet you feel like you got all the symptoms of thyroid? Go ahead, put your hands up. All right, take a look. Look around. I want you to see this because this is, that's about 80% of the room, maybe more, right? And you're going to learn today why that is. I promise you, you're going to leave today with answers. You're going to understand why the blood work shows normal, what blood work is potentially missing, and how that's affecting the body. Okay? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Where do you even start? So I am a almost 3-year breast cancer survivor.
Congratulations.
Thank you. In the process of going through all of that, discovered I have some nodules on my thyroid. I've had ultrasound. I've had those needle biopsy, not fun, don't recommend it. And I've gone to see the thyroid doctor, and I was shocked recently to look at a piece of paper. They never said the word to me, but on a piece of paper I have, it says I have thyroid disease. But it's just something that, it won't ever kill you, it's okay. In fact, I don't even need to follow you, go away. Really? That's all you got from me? And I know my naturopath said, okay, breast cancer and thyroid issues tend to have something to do with iodine. Iodine, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was taking some iodine for a little while, but it's like I don't want to go back into breast cancer issues.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I sure as hell don't want to,
Sure. Thank you for being so honest. You know what? You speak in my language, don't worry. So here's the thing. You said a lot of different things. Number one, if you have one hormone problem, you're going to have multiple, if not all, hormone problems. Is that clear? And you'll understand why. I'm going to go over that today. It's going to make a lot of sense to you. So that speaks to things like if you have thyroid, you'll end up with diabetes. If you have diabetes, you end up with thyroid. If you have a thyroid problem, you could end up with a estrogen or issue. You could end up with toxic estrogen production in the body. Lots of different things. The other thing that I also want to touch on, you said, which is you took iodine. Iodine, again, like anything, is when you look at today's healthcare model in the United States, especially, our model is what we refer to as reactionary. You know what that means? You have an owie, you go to the doctor or the alternative healthcare provider. Now, I put both in that category. Naturopaths, chiropractors, everybody, okay? You go with them with your owie, because most of us do what? We just kind of procrastinate, think it's going to go away, and then eventually we say, all right, we got to pay attention, let's go to the doctor. We go to the doctor, they come up with, 5 minutes of discussion, or 7 minutes, as you suggested, and they run a bunch of tests, and then typically they end up doing what? It's prescription medication or nutraceuticals or supplements, right? Or surgery. Now, what I call that is, I call that reactionary medicine. You're reacting to a situation. You're basically, if you think about a bucket that has holes in it, and your bucket is leaking water, and you're taking a drug, a medication, a supplement, a nutritional supplement, what are you doing? You're filling the water back into the bucket. You're not resolving the holes that are in the bucket. If that makes sense. Our approach is a little bit different. See, because you talk about iodine, right? Iodine, especially in thyroid people, especially if you're autoimmune, can be dangerous. It can actually cause a tachycardia, which is basically an elevated heart rate. It can put you in the hospital. It can cause what we call a thyroid storm. So you got to be very, very careful. And when you do bring in iodine, it has to be very low and very slow. So there's a time and a place for things. And I think that, be it healthcare providers or be it the internet, the bathroom wall of cyberspace where anybody can write whatever they want, and you're trying to navigate through all that information to determine which is accurate and which of it is bogus, right? Would you agree? That's part of the problem. So that's our model. Our model is reactionary. No wonder you're frustrated. Our approach is a little different. We're going to talk a lot about that today. It's being proactive, as in figuring out what's come into your body to cause the cells to break down. See, when we work with clients, we don't look at you on a condition basis. We don't really care too much about that. What we're more interested in is what's actually happening to you on a cellular level and what's coming into the body that's creating those cells to break down. That'll make more sense in just a minute, okay? So I just wanted to touch on that because that's a great reason to be here. So if I don't answer your questions, come back afterwards and grab me, okay? Thanks for sharing. Anybody else have something? Yes, ma'am.
I have the hair loss going on.
Mm-hmm.
I've had multiple blood tests. My doctor says I'm low on my T3 is low.
Mm-hmm.
That I have markers for lupus, but she still doesn't want to help me. And I have chronic pain.
So it's very frustrating, huh?
Yeah.
Lupus, by the way, for those that don't know what that's, another autoimmune condition. If you have one, you can typically have more than one. And as I said earlier, a lot of times your symptoms manifest as autoimmune, but you don't actually, there is no diagnosis for the condition. So that's part of the reason why you get that dismissal a lot of times. They don't know what to do with it. That's the truth. And I want to say this, a disclaimer. I'm not here to poo-poo on doctors, okay? I have a great respect for doctors. They have their place. The challenge is, unfortunately, we put too much of our weight in terms of trust in our doctors. Maybe not so much you guys because you're here today, but most people do. And they don't mean to hurt people. It's just that the model is skewed. It doesn't work. So, but anyway, that speaks to a lot of the reasons they don't know what to do with that. And so we'll touch on that a little bit today. I'm going to go to the back and then come back, okay? Sound good? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm a family nurse practitioner.
Yeah.
And you can imagine I see lots of you guys
Yeah.
in the clinic.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're at the end of your rope medically trying to figure out what's going on. And like you said, if blood work comes back normal.
Right.
I'm here to learn principles on how I can add to my practice
Awesome.
to try and help. I hear what you guys are saying, so.
That's awesome. Give her a hand. It's nice to have people in the medical system wanting to be more involved. It's great. We get a lot more doctors that are listening. It's great. All right, who else? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I've been told that I had multiple different things, but it all seems to point to thyroid. I have hypothyroidism, but depression, but I'm not sad. I don't feel depressed. But physically I feel depressed.
Yeah, right.
Lack of motivation, energy.
Good. These are good ones. Low energy. What else? We cover. Well, there's other people that probably fill in the blanks there. Remember the memory thing, the short-term memory issue, the brain fog. You forgot what you wanted to say. We joke about that all the time. I'll start here. Yes.
My mother is one of 15 children. There's
Yes.
10 girls, and almost all of them have had serious thyroid problems.
Yeah.
And I thought I could beat it because I'm a nurse, and so I've gone the supplement route and all that, but it wasn't really working. And so I've been up to OHSU and bought their endocrine textbooks, and I thought I'm going to figure out the physiology for myself.
Good for you.
But there's just not much there because
Right.
it's all
Mhm.
you have to do is take thyroid and
Mhm.
define, supposedly.
Mhm.
But I'm struggling with heart issues.
Mhm.
I took blood and
Yeah.
had to have ablation. And
Uh-huh.
every time I try to go off thyroid, I go into heart crisis. So I'm just kind of on my roots in, and I don't want to keep living to do something.
Right. How many of you want to live? More importantly, how many of you want quality of life? Right? Who wants to struggle? None of us, right? How many of you would say that your life is good? Generally speaking, you have a happy marriage, for the most part. You have really good relationships with your kids. Things are good, life's good, work's good, but you don't feel good. You feel depressed, and you feel sometimes you wonder if I should take my life. How many of you have ever had that in there? A few of you. Okay. And I'll share my story a little bit more later on about how I had those moments too, and you'll see why. You had something you wanted to say.
I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism 9 years ago, and I've been taking Armour Thyroid for most of that time. I took Synthroid originally and felt awful and just like didn't feel like a normal functioning human.
Right.
And then I was traveling around Europe for a little bit and had a couple pills short of like when I was going to be able to come back, and I was like, oh, I'll just kind of take 6 out of the 7 for the next 2 months, and it'll be like the 8 short, and I'll be fine. And I ended up gaining 25 pounds in that time, even though I was traveling and like constantly moving, but I was just really just tired constantly, and like the last week of my trip I was just basically bedridden in hospitals, and I was so like to the point where I was like, I can't function without this pill every day. Like it just made me mad.
Right.
And so last year I decided to really change my health around and focus on consuming really good nutritional products and like staying away from any pesticides and processed foods and all of that. And about 2 months ago I officially stopped taking my thyroid completely.
Amen to that.
And I haven't had any of the headaches. I haven't had any of like the major weight gain that I had before or anything like that, but I still feel like I'm trying to figure out my own balance within my body. And there's still kind of like that mental fogginess.
Got it. So you've plateaued. You've made great progress, but you kind of plateaued.
And now I'm just kind of seeing what other kind of information is out there and
good.
what else I can continue
Awesome.
to do.
Awesome. Very good. Thanks for sharing. So that, again, that speaks to some of the things we're going to talk about today. I mean, you have to become aware of some of these outside influences that you might not be aware of right now, but you will be by the time we're done. And how, in her particular case, she made some conscious choices to make some changes, change her lifestyle and the things that she was exposing herself to, and just in that, you know, her body started to see some changes. So that's great. The other thing that she talked about was, I call it weight loss resistance. Do you guys relate to that? Okay. Weight loss resistance speaks to the fact that you can lower your caloric intake and you can increase your exercise activity and expect to lose weight. And in some circumstances that might happen, but it's not very much and it's short-lived. And it's not a way of life. It's not sustainable even if you do achieve those results. However, what we have learned over time is that you get to a point where you can literally will plateau and that weight just won't come off. You know, you have to ask yourself this question. If that low caloric diet and exercise model worked, how many of you would be here today? Think about that for a second. If that were the case, why would being overweight or obesity in our country be at the numbers that it's at? Which, by the way, is very high. We're talking over 30% obesity in the United States. We're talking over 50 or 60% being overweight, right? But how many gyms are there in our area? How many books are there on diet and nutrition? You still have to ask that question. If we can hold off on questions, that'd be great. Right. But I want you to think about something else. Why is it then, if somebody who, you know, I laugh about this, my son who's 12, he can eat as much as he wants and won't gain any weight. But there are other people who would look at a salad and gain 5 pounds. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, you can relate to that, right? So you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? And we're going to talk today about something called hormone resistance. Hormone resistance and how it affects the cell is really the biggest reason why people have problems losing weight. In our office, when we train and coach people on how to eat, we never discuss calories, ever. We never count calories, ever. My clients never go hungry, ever. They lose weight like crazy. I had a call just yesterday, a lady who's been with us for 6 weeks. She's 31. She's had weight problems her whole life. We're talking like almost 300 pounds. In 6 weeks, she's lost 35 pounds. And she cannot believe what she's doing. She goes, I love this. This is sustainable. This is the way of life. We're going to touch on that today. So that's why, hang tight, I promise we'll get to that. I'm just giving you some hope that this here, how many of you want to lose weight? And want to lose it forever? Okay. So there's some things you need to learn to make that happen. Would you agree with that? Okay. All right. I think I think that's good. I just want to make sure we stay on time. So I'm sure a lot of you have other reasons why you're here. You know, we talk about hair loss. We talk about the eyebrows. Some of you might lose some hair here on the outer thirds of the eyebrow. That's a big one. The mental fog or the brain fog. You know, that was one. I don't know if I wrote that on here. Depression. We talked about that. You know, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, blood pressure issues are all. Yes, ma'am.
Well, my situation is that I was in a traumatic car accident.
Yes.
And since then, and with the damage that I sustained, I have just steadily gained weight. And there's no, and then I actually, they found AFib 2 years ago.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Well, thanks for sharing. You know, we're going to talk a lot today about stressors. There's three main kinds of stressors: physical, chemical, and emotional. The body doesn't know the difference between the three. It impacts the body the same way. Most of us have, well, we all do actually, we have what I refer to as a biological bucket that stockpiles our stressors as we go through life, right? So when you think about it, in utero, there's going to be exposures that you potentially get from your mom. And then, you know, let's say you have a traumatic birth. Then next thing you know, you have vaccinations. Then next thing you know, life continues. Do you understand? You follow that? And you get to a point where your bucket's fairly full. And then you have a traumatic event, like a physical injury, or a divorce, or a family member that passes, or a financial crisis. These are major triggers in your life that force the body into what we refer to as a chronic inflammatory state. So that's going to make a lot of sense when we get to that, but thanks for sharing. Okay, I just want to touch on something quickly here. I talk a lot about mindset, and I told you earlier, we're really picky about who we work with, and here's why. How good is this information if you don't go home and apply it? It's useless, right? So why is it then people who take the time, come out to these things or to any type of environment, listen, get good information that makes sense, and they never actually do it? Why is that? It's just called a mindset. It's all it is. And that's what this slide speaks to. There's two kinds of people in this world. There's what I call 3%ers and 97%ers. 97%ers are the people who have all the reasons and all the excuses why they can't make a change. Now, you don't have to be a multi-bajillionaire to get things done. Would you agree? Taking small steps, and even today, I'm going to share things that you can go home and do. And if you make those changes, just like this lady talked about herself, some of the stuff she talked about is what we're going to be teaching today, in addition to some other things. And she saw some changes. So it comes down to just actually doing it. A 3% mindset is the same person. You realize that, right? Every person has objections. All of us. Would you agree? How many of you don't have objections ever in life? You see, I'm glad that you're honest. But the 3% finds a way to overcome that. I have a story. My father-in-law and I, and my mother-in-law is in the audience today. My father-in-law and I, and my son, we went on a walk. We were down to Black Butte taking a little vacation, and we went on a hike. And there was some cyclists that passed us, and then all of a sudden they were coming back towards us. And we're like, well, wonder what that's all about. And they said, well, we hit a patch of snow, so we decided to just turn around and come back. Well, we decided to continue. It wasn't much. In fact, it was probably just about 100 feet of snow. It was really interesting. But we continued to go through that. When most people would just turn around and go home, we continued. And we come to this beautiful spot, and it was absolutely amazing. We saw all the mountains that you would see down in Bend, right? And what I found interesting is my father-in-law was the one that said this, not me. He goes, isn't it funny when people just go through and push through that there's always going to be this amazing result at the end if you just push through it? And I said, it's so funny you say that because that's what I talk about in my seminars and that's what I teach my clients. And so I ask you today, okay, you might not agree with everything I have to say, and that's okay. I know what I do is the truth. I know it's honest. I know it works. I've been doing this for a long time. We've helped thousands of people. So you can question it, but for those of you that just are sick and tired of being sick and tired, how many of you are being sick or tired of being sick and tired? Start taking action today, okay? This is me, 2013. I was in a car accident, and my spine did not like that. A disc in my back literally exploded. And so I did everything. I did the chiropractic thing, acupuncture, physical therapy, unfortunately even injection therapy, steroids, all of that. And it didn't give me any relief. So I decided to go down to California and have back surgery. And it was amazing. I got up like right away and I thought, this is the most amazing thing. Unfortunately, 48 hours later, I couldn't walk. I was in so much pain. I could not function. I was in the hospital. I didn't know what was going to happen. They MRI'd me. They said your disc exploded, literally exploded, compressing the cord, compressing the nerve roots. You absolutely no function with my legs. I was hunched over like so. I was on the highest dose of medication you could take. I was in la la land, right? So my option was to do what? Either do surgery again or just live with the pain. So I decided to, my dear mother-in-law got on a plane with me and flew me down, drove me to the doctor. I had surgery again, and it helped, but it was a much longer recovery. And I could have, at that point, it was very depressing because I had a spinal headache after the surgery. It's very painful. I was in misery. And I have a Glock, so be nice. No, I'm kidding. And I almost pulled that thing out. No joke. That's me being very transparent with you because I felt like I hit rock bottom. Here's a guy that's uber active, likes to be, likes to do things, likes to get out. And I felt like this is my life, I don't want to live like this. But you see, that's where that 97% mentality kicks in. And I shifted gears and I said, no way, that's not, I've got a beautiful family. I've got beautiful children. I've got to make this work. So I did, and I went through the things that most people don't. I stayed away from the medication, and I went through the therapies, and I did what I needed to do. And here we are. This is my father-in-law and myself and my brother-in-law and a good friend. Just earlier this year, we summoned Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. So again, it's a mindset thing. It really is. It speaks to a mindset. And I know this seems a little bit like, what has this got to do with you? It has a lot to do with you because it speaks to your mindset. It speaks to you saying, okay, I'm tired of blaming everybody else. I'm tired of pointing the finger at the doctor and all these different people. And that I'm in a place where I'm going to take the time, learn, apply, and execute in my own life. And that's really the only point or message I'm trying to make with this. So, are we good with that? Awesome. All right. Let's get into the subject matter. So, talking about thyroid. It's a massive pandemic. If we look at the numbers alone in the US, we guesstimate that 27 million Americans have a thyroid condition. However, only about half have been diagnosed. And that's critical, and you're going to learn about that today because that speaks to some of you who have all the thyroid symptoms, but nobody's given you a diagnosis of a thyroid condition. Okay? That technically makes thyroid then the #1 endocrine disorder in the US. But which one gets most attention? Diabetes. Why is that? Say that. Somebody put the hand up. Yes, ma'am.
Tests that prove it early on.
It's easier to diagnose. Correct. So it's a lot easier to diagnose. But you're going to learn today that if you end up with one, you more than likely will end up with the other one, and vice versa. And you'll learn why.
I guess there's more money in it too.
In what?
Diabetes.
There's money in all of it, to be honest with you, right? There's money in all of it. But the reason is simply a matter of the tests that they're using, and you're going to see why in just a second. The next question is, do we believe that this is the solution? How many of you think medication is the solution long term? I think short-term meds are good. They bridge a gap when it's necessary. When I ruptured my Achilles tendon, yeah, I've had a few injuries, I was glad I had crutches, but I was just as happy to throw them away. How many of you are taking medication right now? Okay, of those of you taking medication, truthfully, how many of you are scared you're going to be on it for the rest of your life? Right? That's not the way the body is intended, right? There are circumstances where it's necessary. Let's not live in cloud 9 here, but the reality of it is that truly the answer? I believe the same applies to supplements. Do I believe that a person should be taking a poop load of supplements for the rest of their life? Absolutely not. That's where I have a lot of opposition with naturopaths, for example, or even chiropractors. They'll have lists of 20 or 30 or 40 supplements, and they'll tell you, again, this is the way to getting well. But it's not. What is it? It's reactionary. We're reacting. We're using something that might be safer, but we're still, what are we doing? We're filling the bucket with water, right? We're not figuring out why there are holes in the bucket. So this is kind of, that image really depicts us as society. Would you agree? We just sort of follow blindly what we're told to do or what we read online. Let's talk about some of the collateral damage as associated with thyroid disease. It predisposes you to many other degenerative conditions, even when taking the medication. Obesity or weight loss resistance, blocked aorta, heart attacks or cardiovascular, depression. Really, that's one of the things that I believe, I see quite often. And that's one of the things I believe why my father took his life. He was in such a horrible, depressed state. Psychoses, I think that goes with that. Seizures, memory loss, right? Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Mood changes. right? That's a big one. You know, again, you have a good life, and next thing you know, you want to you want to kill your husband or something, right? You know that feeling? And then perimenopause. Others, of course, are weight gain despite diet or exercise. And we're going to talk a lot about why that happens, okay, in a second. Sleep problems and or fatigue. Nobody talked about sleep. How many of you have trouble sleeping? Okay, how many of you, when you do get to sleep, wake up typically between 1 and 3 in the morning? Okay, and of those of you who do wake up at that time, how many of you have anxiety? Some of you. Do you want to know why? Or not?
Yes.
Okay. And again, I'm trying to direct it to your interest. Well, number one, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, there is a shot, your body is secreting cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that's produced in the adrenal glands, which are little glands that sit above the kidneys. And so what happens is the body says, uh-oh, there's not enough glucose in the brain. The brain needs sugar all the time to function, even when you're sleeping. And so what happens is the glucose levels in your brain dip. So the body says, boom, let's get some cortisol going. Which in turn does what? It wakes you up. It's that fight or flight hormone, adrenaline, right? You know, if a dog's chasing you, you know that feeling? That's what happened here. A dog bit me in the face, right? Adrenaline, it gets you going, right? And so that's what wakes you up. And that's another reason why, if adrenaline is being secreted in addition to cortisol, that's another reason why you might have that anxiety. Does that make sense? So it affects your circadian sleep rhythms. And one of the things you're going to learn today is that if you have a thyroid condition, you more than likely have an adrenal problem. And if you have an adrenal problem, you can't get your thyroid under control until the adrenal glands are working effectively. But what causes the adrenals to shut down? Lots of different things. And that's another subject that we're going to touch on today. One thing you need to understand before I move on is that stop thinking of yourself as a condition. Stop calling yourself a thyroid patient or a diabetes patient or a Sjogren syndrome. I don't know how they say it here. I say it the way that they say it in Europe. Or diabetes, right? Stop doing that, because here's what you need to understand. The body works together, in synchrony. If you have a thyroid problem, it might not be the thyroid. It could be pituitary, it could be liver, it could be gut, it could be a lot of different things. You have to look at the whole picture. Does that make sense? I need to go back to that one. Hot flashes, none of you talked about that. Feeling cold all the time, right? Brain fog, we talked about that. Dry skin and thin brittle nails. Infertility is huge, huge. I'm seeing more and more clients that we're working with that are in their late 20s, early 30s. These symptoms were reserved for older people. Now we're seeing it more and more and more. So how do you like that excuse when the doctor says it's your age, you're getting older? How many of you have heard that one, honestly? Don't you just want to kick them? How do you answer that question if a 12-year-old walks in your office and they've been diagnosed with Hashimoto's? You can't use that excuse. I'll tell you what, age, the only reason they use that word age is because you've had the ability to bioaccumulate toxins for a longer period of time, which in turn creates a physiological manifestation in your body. It has nothing to do with your actual age itself. So here's something you need to understand. If you have a will and you have a pulse, you can get well. Is that refreshing? That's the concept I want you to hang on to, okay? Of course, constipation, a lot of gut issues. Constipation, diarrhea, a combination of both. This is a big one. We're going to talk a lot about that today as well. I laugh when I see this. I had two employees that worked for me. One was dealing with a thyroid issue, and the other one was going through menopause. So you can imagine the thermostat wars we were having at the office, right? So we kind of laugh about that. The other thing is if you have a brush that looks like that, or your drain looks like that, how many of you really truly have become just sort of like, it's part of life, it's normal? How many of you have just accepted it? Right? Because you don't know what else to do. It's not okay. It's a symptom of something. I'll tell you a couple of things that it could be as a result of. One of the things that we look at when we recognize or when we sit down with you and we try to figure out what's going on with you, we do ask that you go get some blood work done. And we do involve the doctor with this, okay? I don't actually order the blood test. I want the doctor to do it because I want them involved. See, my job is to coach you and to consult you to become your own health advocate. My job is not to treat you, and neither is your doctor's. The only person that should treat you is you, right? Which you've already started the road on. So we want to teach you how to understand things. One of the tests we always recognize, or recommend I should say, is ferritin. Ferritin is the body's ability to store iron. Inevitably, when someone's losing hair, ferritin levels are typically low. So one of the things that we want to look at is, what are your ferritin levels? The other thing that the ferritin speaks to is liver function. Now, most folks are familiar with liver enzymes. You know, there's ALT, AST, GGT. These are liver enzymes that tell you basically if there's any liver pathology going on. But what people do not talk to you about is something called liver congestion or hepatobiliary congestion. Hepato is liver, biliary is the gallbladder. They are intermittently connected. And those two things play a big role in causing the body to kind of go into a blue screen of death, if you will. Okay? So we're going to talk a lot about that today as well. So the point is if you're concerned about hair or hair loss, there are a lot of reasons, okay, and hormones do as well. But one of the places you should, nobody's looking, and I have shown, and there's tons of research to validate this, when you start to get those iron levels back up in the form of ferritin, then the hair loss stops and the hair can start to grow again. But, see, here's the caveat. If you have a gut issue and you can't absorb that iron, taking an iron supplement is useless. Does that make sense? So in order to get well, there has to be a sequence. Just like a mathematical equation, there has to be certain parts that go in a sequence to get the results. And the answer, or the components, I should say, you might or might not know all of them, but it's how you put them in the right sequence to get that result is what you need to understand. So we have to start in certain places in the body first and go through that sequence before we actually get the results that we're looking for. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So what's the solution? Well, I guess it depends on who you speak to. And of course, what's the cause? Again, we talk about genetics. Yes, there are genetic factors. We all have genetic predispositions to certain conditions, every single one of us. But what controls genetics is something called epigenetics. Epigenetics, think of it this way. This computer we're using right now is like the gene, okay? But what makes the computer work is the software that runs the computer. It tells it what to do, when to do, and how to do it. Epigenetics is exactly that. The word epi just means above the gene. Epigenetics is altered and influenced by various factors, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. So my point is this. Yes, we all have genetic weaknesses. Yes, we can manifest or have genetic expression of a condition. But it's triggered because of these two other factors that come into our body, and that or issues with those two parts in our body. And when we address those, we can actually do what? We can turn those genes off. Is that pretty cool? Yes? Yes, I think so. Come on, I'm not the only geek here, right? We talked about this one, just getting old. I really want you to stop accepting that excuse. It's not okay. Age has nothing to do with it. It's harder, no doubt. It's harder, but it's not an excuse. This is one of my favorites too, the lack of hormones. Right? Your hormones are low, so let's give you something. Let's give you either a synthetic or a supplement version to it or a bioidentical hormone. Again, I don't believe that they are good long term. Crutches, yes. Crutches are okay. But there has to be a starting and an ending point. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You should ask these questions. If your doctor doesn't want to listen to you and give you answers to these questions, fire them and find somebody who will. You need to get answers. It's time to stop doing what everyone tells you to do without knowing why you're doing it. Get the answers first, right? If you go and you take your car and they want to fix your car, and you want to know what the heck they're going to do before you pay that bill, would you agree? Why would you not do the same with your own body? Okay, it's important to understand. One last thing. I know I'm very passionate about this subject, so forgive me, but the United States makes 4.5% of the global population, but we consume, on average, close to 86% of all drugs manufactured in the world. Think about that. We rank 47 out of 53 industrial countries for health performance. We're one of the only countries in the world that permits advertising and marketing of pharmaceuticals in the media. Do you think we've got it wrong? Yeah. I think so. All right, so here's the truth. This is the truth. There's always a cause, and when you figure it out and you get it out of the system, you remove it, the body can heal itself. How many of you believe the body can heal itself? I want to know. Because if you don't, you're in the wrong place. You might as well just go. You will not insult me if you get up and leave. I'm not here to make friends necessarily. I'm here to spread the truth. Okay? So let's talk about that. I want to talk to you about this concept we call the three-legged stool. There's this three-legged stool that we refer to. One of my primary objectives with working with people, number one, is to teach. Because if I can educate you and you can understand it, then you can do what? Then you can apply. Would you agree? So keeping it simple is critical. I don't want to stand up here and impress upon you how smart I am. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to take something complicated and keep it simple. So we're going to talk today about this three-legged stool. Now, this stool we can call disease or dis-ease. That's where the word disease comes from, a state of unease. Or we can call it autoimmune conditions. It doesn't matter. It's all about a condition or a symptom in your body, right? Now, in this stool, there's three legs. The first leg is the genetics. And I spoke to this earlier. We all have genetic weaknesses or tendencies to certain conditions, right? There are two other legs to the stool that will trigger these genes. The first are stressors. Now, these stressors that I'm referring to are, again, I said earlier, I touched on this, emotional, physical, or chemical. So if you think about this, when you sit down with your healthcare provider and they talk about stressors in your life, I mean, number one, I think the one that doesn't get much attention is emotional stressors, right? If you have stuff that you've been exposed to as a child, you can't imagine the stories that I hear every day. I had a lady at the age of 2, she was sexually assaulted by her father. She thought it was normal to have sexual relations with her father up until the age of 18. That's the kind of stuff I hear. Do you think that that has a physiological effect on your body? Do you think that if we don't touch on that and we don't figure out how to get past that, now let me say this, emotional scars or emotional damage causes scars, right? Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it goes away. They do exist. You just have to work through them. It's like when you say, I'm going to forgive someone for what they did to me. The honest truth is we all can agree that we don't just always forget, right? We have to get up every morning and remind ourselves that we forgave them. And it's the same applies with emotional stress. I am no psychotherapist. I'm not a psychologist. I can't, go through that. I mean, that's just not what I do necessarily. But every single person has emotional scars. And if you don't work through them, it's going to manifest physiologically in your body. And if you can't figure it out, you need to find the people or have someone like us help you find the right people so you can deal with that. Because if you don't, and you just want to forget about it, you're never going to get what you're looking for, which is true health. Can you agree with that? I mean, you have a problem with that concept? The other stressors are physical stressors. We think about careers. If you have a job that's very physically demanding, or if you've been in multiple car accidents or surgeries, these are physical insults to the body. These are all bioaccumulate. Those are great examples. And then, of course, the last being chemical, and that's one we're going to talk a lot about today as well, right? Figuring out what those are. But again, I want you to understand that in order to get well, diet and nutrition in itself is not enough. It's kind of like the analogy of a car where the engine is broken. And you buy the most expensive oil and you throw it in the engine and you expect the engine to run. Would you laugh at that? You would, right? Now, the same applies with nutrition. I think it still has a benefit to the engine. It helps it work more efficiently. But there's other things that have come into the body that are causing the body to not work effectively. And a lot of the time, that's going to be the things that we're going to talk about today. So the second leg of the stool is stressors. And then the final leg is what we refer to as the microbiomes, or the bacteria in your gut. Microbiomes are these friendly and unfriendly, gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria that live in the mouth and into the gut. 80% of your immune system is determined or controlled through the health of your microbiomes. Did you know that?
Yes.
The average human has 10 times more microbiomes than human cells. So think about this. If I'm supposed to have 10 times more microbiomes than human cells, and I'm using antimicrobial soaps, and I'm eating foods that are destroying the bacteria in my gut, do you think potentially we're going to cause a gut problem? Right. So where do you think we need to start? One of the first places we need to start is your gut. Would you agree? We need to learn if you've got yeast growth or candida, and a lot of times it doesn't show up in a stool test, but over 80% of Americans have some kind of a yeast issue. Common symptoms are chronic UTIs, vaginal yeast infections, toenail fungus issues. These are common for yeast growth in the gut. Yeast is resilient. It takes a lot of work to kill that guy. But once you've killed it, you have to rebuild the gut, right? So that could be one. Or parasites. You know, if you've ever traveled, even in the US, but especially if you go outside of the US, south of the border, there's a good chance you're going to pick up a parasite. There's lots of others. Dysbiosis, SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. These are all factors that we see. So we have to start here with the gut. One other thing I want to point out to you is, actually ask a question here. Does anybody know where we get our microbiomes from or where it happens? Yes, ma'am.
When we're born.
Yes, correct. During the vaginal delivery. So if I was a C-section baby, do you think there's a disadvantage? What are we seeing in society today? Is there more C-sections than before?
Yes.
Right. What are we seeing with autoimmune conditions? Are we seeing more of it now than we have before? Okay, so this is one of the dots that we want to connect. So microbiomes are critical to immune function and gut function and preventing things like leaky gut, which is where we get into absorption issues, right? Like we talked about earlier. So bottom line is this. You have to start with the gut. But most importantly, it's not just the gut. All three have to be addressed in order for that stool not to wobble. Would you agree? Like if you think about a stool, all three legs have to be equal. You can't just focus on one and ignore the others. But there are sequences in which we have to go through for the body to be able to respond and heal in a way that will allow it to get to that complete state of health. Okay? So this is a really important concept, and it's just a very, like I said, it takes all three of these to solve the problem. Does this make sense? Anybody have a challenge or concern or not understand it? Okay, good. So let's go through some of these thyroid issues, or what I call myths. Can you see? Am I blocking you?
It's okay.
You can tell me to move. Okay, well, go ahead. Yeah. So, number one, uncovering the truth. Hormones such as Thyroid, Levoxyl, and others are your only answer. Let's tell the truth here. 80% of the time, thyroid hormones do nothing to relieve your symptoms and obviously do not fix your condition. Now, let's just touch on that. I'm sure most of you here who have had a thyroid condition diagnosed, you've taken a thyroid medication, correct? And would you say that some of you felt some great results or felt some improvement right away, right? But some of you then sort of kind of after even a period of say 3 to 4 months, it plateaued or things got worse. In fact, I would say that some of you here today would say if I took it or didn't take it, it wouldn't make a difference. Yes? Yeah. I know some of you it does make a difference, but for some of you it doesn't. If you look at the research, 80% of the time it does nothing to relieve your condition long term. But more importantly, if I'm taking a drug for the rest of my life, am I actually fixing the condition? No. So why do we use that language? Why do we say we fixed your thyroid condition? You have to ask yourself that question, right? Excuse me?
I think they say that because your lab values come within the acceptable range, but the symptoms aren't.
The symptoms don't, and again, you're still on the drug, so it's still not an issue of fixing it, right? And you still feel like crap, which is the most important thing. Exactly. 80% of these hypothyroid conditions are autoimmune, which is what we primarily refer to as Hashimoto's, and will not respond to synthetic hormones. Something you might or might not know. Within Hashimoto's, there are 6 variations to it, and only 1 is responsive to medication. Within hypothyroid, there are 22 variations. Did you know that? Kind of important to know, wouldn't you agree? You kind of have to know what you're dealing with. So the question, of course, is, has your doctor checked you for autoimmune disease? How many of you would say you've been checked for autoimmune? Okay, yeah, like 3 or 4. Why do you think they don't check for it?
They don't know how to deal with it.
A, they don't know what to do with it, and B?
There's no physical manifestations, they're not going to pursue it.
Okay, but there are physical manifestations because most people have symptoms when they go to the doctor. Visual. Okay. What else do you? Thank you. What else do you think is another reason?
It's not cost effective.
Cost of it? No, it's super inexpensive test. Thyroid peroxidase and.
For them to earn more money.
Oh, got it. Maybe. I don't think that's it. Yes, ma'am.
I was told that my doctor didn't believe me, that I was just making it up.
Yes. How many of you hear that? Okay. You're crazy, right? Yep. You're all Looney Tunes. We all should be taught to put up in a white box, right? Okay. So here's the reason why. Because it doesn't change the outcome of the treatment. If you're diagnosed with autoimmune, they might check your blood more frequently, but that's about it. You still are going to be prescribed medication. right? One of the classic telltale signs of an autoimmune thyroid issue is up and down TSH numbers. So if you're getting it done and it's like it goes to say 5 and then 3, then 4, then 6, then whatever, you know, that's classic for autoimmune, okay? But the reason they don't typically test for it is because A, it doesn't change the outcome of what they're going to do, and B, like any doctor who orders a test or an exam, even if they're not the ones interpreting the data, they're still liable and responsible for the information. So if I took an x-ray or I ordered an x-ray, I am responsible for picking up anything that a radiologist didn't pick up. Talk about liability, right? So that's another reason. A lot of times they'll just, I'm not an endocrinologist, I don't understand this stuff, I don't want to know this stuff. And you know what, God bless them. General practitioners have to deal with a lot of different things all the time. So they can't be experts in everything, right? But the reason they don't order it is because of liability, and number two, they don't know what else to do with it. It doesn't change. Even an endocrinologist will not change necessarily your treatment based on those numbers. So that's the reason. But I will say this. In order to work with someone, I need to know if you're autoimmune or not. Here's why. The direction we take autoimmune clients versus those that are not is 180 degrees to each other. Like literally. Do you think that makes a big difference? Yeah, it does, right? You need to know. And if you have an autoimmune, that means that the body is attacking your thyroid gland. And if you have high elevated TPO numbers, as an example, that's dangerous long term. You're going to destroy the thyroid and possibly create a cancerous environment. So you have to know about this stuff, and you have to be able to deal with that.
What's TPO? Is that
Thyroid peroxidase.
okay?
Your blood work is fine, and so are you. Okay, I think a lot of us can agree that that's bogus, right? So by the time your blood work shows a positive test, you more than likely can have had the symptoms for 10, 20, even possibly 30 years. So let's talk about why that is. Most doctors will use this particular blood test called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which is produced in the pituitary gland. That is in the brain. Okay, it's right up here. It tells the thyroid to produce primarily T4, which is an inactive hormone. That T4 is bound to a protein, it's transported in the blood, goes to the liver converts it from T4 to T3. The T3 is bound to a protein that's carried in the blood, then becomes free, and that's the hormone that physiologically will have an effect on the cell, right? So that's basic physiology. But what they do is they look at TSH primarily. Now some will order the T3, T4, free T3, etc. But here's what you may or may not know. There are no studies that have ever been published demonstrating that if you have healthy thyroid function, when your TSH falls within normal range. But yet it's the gold standard for thyroid. Above and beyond that, most physicians use what we refer to as non-optimal ranges. Now, when you look at lab forms or lab results, there's your results and then you have a reference range. How many of you know where that comes from? It's an average for the entire population. It's what, when they draw blood, this is kind of where everybody sort of falls into, right? So that's what the range is. Now, we talk about optimal ranges, as in hitting it in the sweet spot, right? So what's the sweet spot? Most studies show that if your TSH values are greater than 2, it can indicate a thyroid issue, including autoimmune thyroiditis. So, but when we look at lab normals, depending on the lab, can be 0.5 to 5.5. That's the highest I've seen. There are labs now that are saying 3.0, but most doctors haven't adopted that yet. So if we think about it this way, if we're saying you want your TSH to be under 2, but your TSH numbers are, and they're saying it should be 5.5 or higher, then you have an autoimmune condition or you have a thyroid issue. Can you see if you're down at a 2.2, it could take 10 or 20 years before you actually hit the lab reference range or exceed the lab reference range? Do you see that? So that's one reason, there's many more, but that's one reason why you'll be told you have normal blood work, but you don't feel normal. So the first thing you want to look at is your TSH. 0.5 to 2.0 is kind of the, right in the middle, like 1.5, 1.75 is really a good place to be in terms of TSH. But it's not enough information. Okay, so that's the first caveat. Number 2, T3, as in free T3, cannot get its message into the cell. This is the most important thing I'm going to go over today. If you understand this concept, then we're done. So, I am no artist, okay? I'll do my best. So what I'm going to draw here is the cell. And let me tell you why. Remember I said earlier, in order to get well, we need to look at you on a cellular level. We have a little saying in our office, fix the cell and the body gets well. So when we're working with clients, we're not interested, we are, but we don't put as much focus and attention on a condition. We're interested in what's going on here on a cellular level. Does that make sense? So when you look at when you look at a cell in the human body, it's made up of 2 layers of fat. We call it a bilipid layer. Do you know what the fat is? Anybody have a guess? What kind of fat it is? Saturated fat and cholesterol, the 2 very things you're told not to consume, right? Your doctor tells you lower your cholesterol intake because it's going to increase your risk for having what? Buildup of cholesterol, possibly plaque. I'm here to tell you that's bogus. Good, solid, healthy fat, saturated fat and cholesterol is what you need. Not only on a cellular level, but on a neurological level. The brain, the nervous system is all made up of saturated fat and cholesterol. So you have this bilipid layer, and then you have receptors. These are the cell receptors or hormone receptors, which are also referred to as a lipid raft, okay? It's another fat. So in a healthy human being, you would have these hormones floating through the blood. Let's go with T3, of course, or insulin, or leptin, which is the hormone that tells your brain to use fat for energy, or estrogen, or progesterone, or whatever hormone you want, even your vitamins, D3. Okay? They come and they attach to the receptor. They dock on the receptor. They then tell the brain of the cell, by the way, that's the nucleus, but the true intelligence we've learned in the last 10 years actually lives in the cell membrane. But just for the point of understanding this is where your gene or your DNA sits. It tells the brain, hey, there's a hormone here. The brain does an action or takes an action. One of the actions it does is it tells the energy factory of your cell, which we call the mitochondria, to make a lot of energy. Do you understand the human body needs a lot of energy to work? Okay, so it makes this energy, and in biology we call this ATP, or adenine triphosphate. Now we need a lot of this energy for it to work. But when we make energy, let's think about this. If we make a fire, what's a byproduct? Smoke, right? Which is what? It's a toxin. So if I'm making energy, I'm going to have toxins that are going to be created inside the cell. Just like a human, we consume, but what else do we need to do? Excrete, right? So the body has to get rid of these toxins. The thing that allows for that to happen is this thing called glutathione, which is abbreviated GSH. Glutathione is the most powerful antioxidant the body produces, but it requires a lot of energy. So glutathione is produced, it escorts these toxins, it naturally chelates the toxins out of the cell, but then the other thing it does is it downregulates inflammation in the cell membrane. And that's going to be important in just a minute. But I just want you to understand this basic concept. Hormone docks to the cell membrane, or to the receptor on the cell membrane. In turn, it creates a signal in the brain of the cell telling the energy factory to make a ton of energy. As a result of that, the cell can now function the way it's supposed to, right? Proper metabolic function, etc. And then, of course, toxins build up, but the body has to get rid of it, so it produces an antioxidant to help get rid of it. Do you guys understand that? Okay. Now, there's 3 main things that come into your body, and these are categories, okay? Within them, there's multiple subcategories. So it's important. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want you to get a general idea. Number 1, bad fats. Bad fats are the PUFAs, the polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's the I can't believe it's not butter crap, okay? That's what I'm talking about there. The next one is, you remember that one? Okay, next one, sugars and grains, okay? And number 3 are toxins, which can be made up of biotoxins. Biotoxins would be mold and Lyme disease, and or environmental toxins. And we're going to talk a lot about environmental toxins today. So these are the 3 main categories. Within them, there's what? Multiple, right? So these things come into your body, and they drive this oxidative stress on the membrane. Oxidative stress is like if you take a piece of metal and you expose it to water and air, it rusts, right? That's oxidation. Or if you let a glass of wine sit out for days, it turns orange. That's oxidation that's happening. We use that word oxidation. You can also use the word inflammation, right? Inflammation, you're going to learn, is really the root cause of every condition and every disease in the body. So these things come into the body and they drive this inflammatory response, which in turn blunts the receptor. Think about this. If you were to go to a gas station, would you pour gas on your car and then get in and leave? I mean, if someone did that, you would laugh, right? And that's the same concept here, is that when there's inflammation on a membrane level and these receptors are blunted, this is another reason why you might have normal hormone levels in your blood, but you have all the symptoms you're manifesting of a thyroid condition. It's because that hormone can't get in, attach to this receptor and create a physiological effect on the cell. Does this make sense? So this is one of the reasons why people will have issues. So if the hormone can't latch on here and can't tell the nucleus to tell the membrane or the mitochondria to make energy, what happens to your energy production?
Zero.
Well, it wouldn't go to zero because you'd be dead, right? But it goes down. So your physiological function goes down. That's where I'm so tired all the time. I sleep, but I can't get any energy. I can't lose weight. I'm cold all the time. These are all these symptoms that start to develop. Now, you're still making energy, so you're still making toxins. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. Now, if I have toxins that are being made, and remember what I said earlier, GSH, glutathione, is very energy dependent. We need on average 3 of these to make 1 of these. So if I'm making less of this, am I making less of this? Yeah. Okay, so I'm making less of this. What does this thing do? It does what to toxins? It escorts them out of the cell. It's a natural chelator, and it also helps to downregulate the inflammation here in the membrane. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. So if toxins start to build up in the cell, it creates a state we call hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen, which tends to create changes in the cell. And when the body sees a cell that's sick, what does it do? It says, let's get rid of it. Let's kill it off. So you start to do that, and that's when you start to develop premature aging symptoms. I call them premature aging. These are symptoms that you're all manifesting way too early on in life. The hair loss, the weight loss resistance, the dry brittle nails and skin, right? These are the symptoms I'm talking about. So your body goes into what I call a premature aging state. Now, the other thing that can happen is that the cell can actually there's a mutation that can happen. What do we call mutation? What's the end result?
Cancer.
Cancer. When you die of cancer, you don't die of cancer, you realize that, right? You die of a hyperproliferation of a non-functioning cell. In English, that means you die of organ failure. The organ is filled with cells that don't have any function or purpose. So a mutation can actually happen not only in the nucleus, but actually here in the membrane, and the cell starts to genetically express itself in a non-healthy functioning state. And this is the root cause of it all. So this is why it's important to understand that when you're working with folks, the only way to really figure out if you can help and get well and get healthy is you have to look here. You have to look at the integrity of the cell membrane. You have to look at the integrity of the receptors on the cell. And if you allow the body, remove the things that are causing the body to break down, the body can heal. If the body can heal, what happens to your conditions and your symptoms? Okay. Now, anybody have a problem with that, or does this make sense? Is everybody good? This is refreshing, right? So fix this? Yes, ma'am.
Could you go back one step for me and tell me what causes the inflammation?
Great.
Because that's what I have.
Okay, so most people do. In fact, everyone, we do a test. First thing we do is we have you do a pee test, a urine test when you come in, and it's going to tell us if you're inflamed or not. But the things that cause inflammation are these 3 main categories. So again, toxins and bad foods and sugars and grains and environmental stressors, and these are the things that come into our body. We live in a very toxic world, would you agree? More toxic than ever, okay? That's a great question, and that depends on the individual. See, here's something else that I talk about when I work with clients. There is no such thing as a cookie cutter system. You cannot create a system for every person, because if I think about your background, if we sit down and we talk about your life and all the things you've done and places you've lived and things you've been exposed to, they're different than yours, right? So in order to go through a process of getting rid of that stuff, we have to figure out, first of all, what we're dealing with, and then create a plan that's very specific to you. So there's going to be some answers today about things that everyone can make changes in and will affect you. It'll make a great impact and improve the quality of your life. But if you want to take it to the next level, the only way to know is for us to sit down and figure it out. Most of my work I do with people is I play crime scene investigator. I'm listening to your story and figuring out where you've been. It's refreshing for my clients, somebody who actually asks the right questions and then just shuts up and listens. Because if I ask the right questions and we figure it out, then we can really create a specific plan for you. Does that make sense? Yeah. So anyway, there was a question. Did I answer your question about? Yes. Okay, very good. The other, of course, is that T4 may not be converting to active T3. Okay, so where does that conversion primarily happen? In the liver. Do you think liver health is important? You need enzymes in the liver to make that conversion. You need selenium, which is a mineral that helps for that conversion process to happen. The problem is people don't realize there's certain toxins in your body that are magnets for selenium. So you could be supplementing with selenium. You might have blood levels that appear normal, but because of these toxins that are in your body, they are sucking that bioreadily available selenium and therefore affecting those enzymes in that conversion process. So that could be another reason. Also, your gut, 20% of active T3 is converted in the gut. So again, another reason why your gut health has to be in order before you can really expect to get well. Now, this is another one some of you might or might not know about. There's a hormone called reverse T3. So remember, T4 is produced in the thyroid primarily. T4 travels through the blood, goes to the liver converts it to T3, a percentage, and a certain percentage to reverse T3. Reverse T3 is molecularly identical to T3. However, it doesn't have a true physiological effect on the cell. It doesn't do what you want it to do here. It is there for a purpose. Okay? It's for example, if you have a cold or a flu, right? How do you feel? You feel like right now probably, right? Tired, fatigued, brain fog, all that. The reason it happens is the body produces reverse T3 in those moments to block those receptors from T3 to preserve energy for the body to heal. That's the purpose of it. But it's supposed to be intermittent. It's not supposed to be chronic. So what we do with folks is we will ask for this blood test to be ordered, and then we do a calculation. So looking at the reverse T3 number in itself is not enough. We actually have to do this equation and then determine, are you in a reverse T3 dominant state? Reverse T3 dominance is caused by physical, emotional, chemical stressors. Does that make sense? So this is another reason why you can have all the normal tests come back saying you're normal. But if they're not looking for reverse T3 dominance, that could be your answer. So do you see there's more to this than just TSH? Yes? Are we learning something today? Okay, awesome. So again, I think it's important to understand that we can't just run those tests. Now, if you don't believe me that inflammation is the root cause of all disease, let's go to the, Time magazine, right? That's the standard for truth. Right? I know. This article was published in 2004, so we're talking 11 years ago. The secret killer. The surprising link between inflammation and heart disease, cancers, Alzheimer's, and many other diseases. It's kind of it's interesting. I threw this up here because we talk about, one of the things we teach our clients is fat and how to eat the right kind of fats and eat a lot of it. And it's ironic because one of my employees, when she had a lot of health issues and I asked her to make some changes and eat fat, and she looked at me like, what? You want me to eat fat? She wanted to lose weight, right? Finally, she got past it. She lost 35 pounds in less than 2 months. And the only thing she did was eat more fat and cut out some things in her diet. So it's funny when people, because again, what have we been told? Low fat, low fat, low fat since the 90s or 80s even. 80s, right? Low fat, low sugar. Yeah, it's garbage. High fat, good fats. All right, quick summary. Your blood work is fine, and so are you. I think we can agree that that's not okay. First place we need to look at is, are you autoimmune? There are blood tests for it. I want you to know that 70% of the time when you do an autoimmune panel, it might come back negative, but it doesn't rule out that you don't have an autoimmune condition, because antibodies do this. They go up and down. Okay? So if you suspect autoimmunity in a person and the test is negative, I would say retest in 3 or 4 weeks or 60 days, or when you start to feel a little different, because that's when they'll catch it. That's why it's important to make sure you understand how that test works. Do you see how important education is? Do you see how important you have to understand this stuff so you can intellectually communicate, or communicate with your doctors? Because you'll know more than they'll know about this stuff. And that's because they can't do it all, right? Let's give them some grace. They can't do it all. They have to be, they're the one-stop shop for everybody. So you need to become informed. You cannot put the responsibility on your doctor anymore. Number 2, it's a hormone receptor problem driven by inflammation. This is why I said earlier, if you have one hormone problem, you'll end up with multiple. Does that make sense? That's why if you have diabetes, you can develop a thyroid issue, or a weight loss resistance issue with leptin, for example. Or you have toxic estrogen is something that people don't even talk about. Toxic estrogen is something that, I don't want to get into too much details, but that's the driving factor for all those reproductive cancers. Breast cancer, uterine cancer, and all.
Triple negative.
Triple, yeah, and it doesn't always come back positive on a test. But the problem is most people aren't testing for that. And believe it or not, toxic estrogen comes not only from things that are happening physiologically in the body, but you can get it from plastics, for example. BPA is one of the things that triggers toxic estrogen production. So you have to come up with a way to remove these elements from the body. The other thing, you talk about it didn't show up. I mean, I can tell you clients that have had parasites that have been hiding in the gallbladder but didn't show up in any blood test or any stool test. And eventually, just by using some provocative protocols, those things were pushed out, and then we got them and picked them up in the stool. So just because the test doesn't show something's negative or positive, does it mean that it's right? I mean, think about our country. We are 5 to 7 minutes. I like that number. 7's my favorite number. And what do? We order test. And then at the end of all those tests, nothing's wrong. You're okay. There's nothing wrong with you.
Or there's something wrong, but you'll be fine.
Because they don't know what to do with it. When I went to school, what is that? 23 years ago. I know that's hard to believe. I know. Seriously, 23 years ago, when I went to school, I was taught that the diagnosis comes from listening to your patient. 90% of it. 10% is validated through testing. That's how medicine or how healthcare is designed. Because you have to come up with a differential diagnosis. You have to come up with 5, 6 different things you think might be going on. And the testing should only either support or validate or excuse some of those issues. But the only way to really know is by listening, right? How do you know what's going on in your children's life if you don't shut up and listen? How do you know what's going on in your patient's life if you don't and listen? Right? Would you agree? Yeah.
So what do you do when you've been through 3 doctors, your tests are off the charts bad, like my TPO is 900 plus?
Yeah, right. So what you do...
You're telling me there's nothing wrong with me.
Of course. You're smarter than they are. And number 2, you just keep going and you keep going. You know what? The most successful people in the world fail the most. The most successful people fail the most. Why? Because they keep trying. And they finally figure it out. I know how frustrated you must be. I deal with this every single day. You're in the right place. We're going to get answers today. I promise. Okay? The body can't convert T4 to T3. Again, that could be a liver issue. It could be a congestion issue in the liver. Or it could be a low mineral issue. Or you could have a reverse T3 dominant state, which is a chemical, emotional, or physical stresses that will cause this. So the bottom line is this. You have to get the right tests, right? In addition to what we discussed. But honestly, when I do tests, I'm very, very specific about what I want. And one of the most important tests that I do is one that you do when you come into the office. And the first thing I want to know about is what? Are you inflamed? Does that make sense? Why? Now, what's the most common blood test for inflammation? Sed rate, or C-reactive protein is another one, right? But you realize that it's not always sensitive enough to pick up the inflammation on a cellular level. So when the cell oxidizes, when the membrane oxidizes, it produces a byproduct, an aldehyde, a chemical that's secreted into the urine. And that urine, when we test that urine, we can actually pick up on that 50 times more accurately than a blood test. So when this test shows a positive, you could have a blood test that's negative. If the blood test is positive, this test is off the charts. It's a color discolor. You know when you ever watch CSI when they're looking for blood, and they get a little blood cell and they put it in that tube and it turns blue, right? You guys can relate to that? That's what we do with your urine, except it turns pink or purple. If it turns really purple, we know that you're super inflamed, right? That can, in someone who has a high C-reactive protein level or sed rate, they will be dark on that test. But if you're pink, that's a problem. You have inflammation. I'm going to say that 95% of the people or population has inflammation because you're exposing yourself to things in our environment that are driving that inflammation. So we have to know if you're inflamed. So if you do come and work with us, just be ready to go to the bathroom. You'll laugh because I joke around about that because I'll come and I'll say, hey, how you doing? You ready to go to the bathroom? And people laugh. So this is one of the tests. There's others, but this is one we use in our office. You will not see this in a clinic. You will not see this in a doctor's office. This isn't something they do, right? Because they're not looking at finding inflammation on a proactive level. It's reactive, remember that. So it's important that we use this first test. And then from here on out, once we know there's inflammation present, right, now we can sit down and figure out where that's coming from. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, good. All right, we're just a little bit past the halfway point, and the next segment is going to be based on things that you can start doing. Before we move on, I just want to check in with you all. How are we doing? Is this good? Yeah. Are we feel like we're learning something? Anybody feeling like they've wasted their time so far? If so, I apologize. You're welcome to leave. Okay. Obviously, for some of you, you can go home and you can try and figure this out on your own, and that's totally cool. And I want everyone to do what they need to do. For some of you, you're just sick and tired of being sick and tired. If you're looking for a health coach, I'm here. You're welcome to work with us. We need to sit down and figure out if it's a good fit. However, we want to give you an opportunity that's good today. So on the back of your handouts, you can take a look at that, and there's an offer for you. All you need to do is fill that out and then see Christy in the back, and she can get you the paperwork and get you scheduled if you choose to execute, okay? All right, now, social proof is a big deal. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. Right? You don't want to just take my word for anything, for what I'm saying. So I've been asked to present. I only have, it's very short. I've taken some of our clients, and most of them are, they're grandmas, right? And I did this for a reason. Because people say if I'm old, there's no reason to continue, right? If I'm old, what's the point? I'm too old to get well. So I selected these. They are very long typical. I mean, it took us over 2 hours to record this material. They're retired. They have nothing else to do but chat. So we decided, okay, instead of presenting all of it, because I know you guys don't want to listen to all of it, I just wanted to share with you just a little bit because I want you to see where they were, which is where you are now, and where they are now, or where they ended up, okay? So that's 3 minutes, and then after that, we're going to dig deep into some things that you can start doing starting today. Fair? Okay.
I have been taking thyroid medicine since I can remember. And I've been taking high blood pressure and high cholesterol medicine for years. It was devastating. My hair was falling out. I was gaining weight that I did not want to gain. And I was tired all the time.
I had no energy. I was tired all the time. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't do anything. I felt like I was in a massive depression all the time. My hair was falling out. I was gaining weight. I just, not eating, but gaining weight. It was bad. It was bad. There's just everything. My skin, my hair, my nails, everything was just falling apart on me.
I went to about 12 doctors. I had gone to many different specialties because I was having a lot of trouble with my back. This is when I first quit work. And nobody could diagnose me.
In 2 months, I no longer was pre-diabetic. I no longer needed my high cholesterol medicine. I was not losing my hair like I was before. In 4 months, I no longer needed my high blood pressure medicine. My energy level was coming back, and I'd lost some weight. So this is nothing short of a miracle in 2 months and 4 months to not need these anymore. It's amazing. It's just amazing. I didn't know you could do this.
He found out that my liver and my kidneys weren't functioning right. They found out that I had the celiac disease, found out that I was allergic to eggs, stuff that I'd never even dreamed of being wrong with me. I've lost 35 pounds, and I have so much more energy. I just want to go all the time. I have a new job that I'm fine working lots of hours, early morning hours, late night hours. It doesn't bother me. I play with my grandkids now. It's great. I like it. My feet are softer, my skin, my hair, everything. Everything is so much better. My brain is more clear. I can think clearly. And it's great.
I just walk around the neighborhood, our whole subdivision, and look around, visit with the neighbors, and enjoy the birds, and the sunshine, and relieves tension. Number one, it helps me lose weight because I've lost 30 pounds. And so now I can keep on losing, hopefully. And it'll be better for my health. And that's one reason I decided to go ahead and do it. I either pay the money now, get well, and take care of myself, or I wait until I'm broken down and pay the expense of the hospital or whatever when I can't make it anymore. I feel good. I feel like I got my life back. I mean, I can do things that I want to do. I wasn't ready to just sit down. I wanted to get up and move.
All right, pretty cool, right? Yeah. And that, you know, I'm glad that we have a few, we have lots of them, but you know, the point is this, is that that's all that really matters. It's the quality of life. Did you pick up in what she said? She went to 12 doctors, right? And she kept going until she found the right thing.
I finally got an endocrinologist.
Well, again, but even with that, it's not always the right answer. And my point is this, you know, I am not, listen, I have all kinds of credentials, but I'm not licensed as a doctor in the state of Oregon, so I cannot call myself a doctor in the state. That, you need to know that. It's crazy how it is, but that's to protect you, the public. But what I can I can coach and educate people. I have clients all over the world. We have an international virtual practice, which is really cool because I can sit in front of a computer and I can Skype with clients, or I can be on the phone because I'm coaching and I'm teaching and I'm educating, because that's, to me, the number one thing. Ultimately, when we're done, I want you to be your own health advocate. I want you to have a PhD in you and how your body works. And that when someone tells you something, you have the evidence, the material, the science, unbiased science. Remember, always look at the research, but look at who published it and who funded it. You got to look at that stuff and know that you know what you know. That's the key to getting well, okay? So my job is to coach people and teach them what to do, but ultimately, who has to take that step? Who's responsible for you getting well? And I know all of you are action takers, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I'm assuming that, right? Why come here and learn and then not do something about it? Unless you're completely in disagreement with what I'm saying, and that's your choice, of course. So let's get into some of the solutions, okay? Number one, stressors drive inflammation. Inflammation turns on genes. Remember, we talked earlier about that. So what are your stressors? Of course, each individual person here today has stressors that we need to, you know, sit down and ask specifically, but these toxins that we're going to talk about not only cause inflammation in the cell membrane, but they also interfere with the thyroid receptors, and they can actually bind to certain toxins, blocking these receptors and driving an autoimmune response. We refer to these main culprits as the thyroid toxic top 5. So all of you can start paying attention to these and start working on getting these out of your system or out of your diet or out of your lifestyle. The first one is, I'm going to scream through these, okay? Number one, PCBs and dioxins. Again, found mostly in non-organic foods. Now, listen, I can go on and on and on about the definition of organic, and I had a guy once challenge me on that. He's like, organic, everything's organic. But I'm talking if you look at the definition of organic, we're talking about foods, all right? Understand this. Even with organic practices, there's still issues with the soil that we're growing our organic foods in. You can understand that, right? There's toxins in there, there's depletion of nutrients. But ultimately, the first place that we want, if you want to avoid PCBs and dioxins, is you've got to go to organic meats and dairy, if you can consume dairy, that is. That's the first place you have to start, okay? Now, I understand financially you might say, well, oh my gosh, that's going to cost me a lot more money, da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, yes and no. We live in the Northwest. Guess what? We have a lot more options than the Midwest, for example. So if you don't want to go to Whole Foods or Whole Paycheck, I'm with you. What a waste of money, right? There are other places that you can get this stuff. Lots of great choices. You just have to take some time and energy and effort. You have to learn new habits. And I'm a golfer. To learn how to swing a golf club, it takes time to do it right. But you don't quit when you don't get it. You just keep going. Same applies here. You have to rethink the way you've been thinking. It's important. And you might have to do things that are considered inconvenient, like driving 10 miles to go somewhere to get something that you could save 50% on. But it's better for you. Okay? You see, I'm pushing you guys a little bit. But it's important. Number two, pesticides. We can also talk about herbicides or insecticides. But here's a study that was published with women married to men who used pesticides. They had a 2-fold increase in developing a thyroid disease. Again, just the husband being out there working with these pesticides increased that risk because it has an effect on the thyroid. It's a neurotoxin that drives inflammation in the thyroid. That study was published in 2001, so it's a while ago. Number three is heavy metals. This is a big one. Now, the number one source of heavy metals that we discuss are amalgam fillings, right? Specifically mercury and lead, etc. Now, some of you might have issues with that, but let's take a look at some of the studies. This was a study done in Sweden, and it was published in 1987. And it stated this, that when they did autopsies, they found that the more amalgams present in the mouth, right, in their mouths, that more mercury was found in the organs, including the brain, the kidneys, heart, and liver. Now, let's think about this. If you have amalgams and you're chewing, right, they produce a gas. That gas crosses the blood-brain barrier and converts into an inorganic state, specifically in the hypothalamus, primarily. The hypothalamus is the endocrine control tower. It controls all your hormones. So do you see maybe how that could play a factor? Another thing mercury does in the brain is it causes necrotic changes and causes damage to the brain cells linked to Alzheimer's, right? If we look at OSHA's guidelines on how scrap amalgam material is handled, in 1986, OSHA put out guidelines. Number one, when removing scrap amalgam material, do not touch it with your hand. Number two, keep it away from a warm, moist environment. Well, what do you think your mouth is? All of that, right? So why is it that OSHA is saying it's dangerous when it's out of your mouth, but it's okay when it's in your mouth? How does that make any sense? Does it make any sense? Do you know that most countries ban the use of mercury amalgams? The US and Mexico are really the only two countries still that use them, other than some African countries. So you have to ask yourself that question. Yes, I know they're doing other things now, but do you think that we have a problem with amalgams? Absolutely. So take a look at the symptoms associated with mercury. Interesting, huh? Now, I want to say this. Whatever you do, do not call your dentist and have your amalgams removed on Monday. Do not do that. Because, remember, you are sick. You have issues in the equation where things are not breaking down. You have a weakened immune system. If you unload a stressor before your body can handle it, you're going to drive your condition even further downstream. Does that make sense? Do not just go and jump and have those removed. There are right ways of doing it. There are right ways of preparing the body, and more importantly, there are certain types of dentists that you want to be aligned with that do the removal process. They should be wearing a biohazard suit. They should have ventilation systems up the kahoo. They should have dental dams. There's a lot of procedures here that need to be in place when these are removed safely. So for your benefit, as much as you might or might not disagree with this, in fact, if you don't agree, go to Google, search it. There are thousands of studies that have been published on the danger of mercury. Okay, so and amalgam fillings. Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's two in this area. One here in Lake Oswego and one in Vancouver. The one in Lake Oswego is where my family and I go for our dentistry. He's super busy. It's hard to get in to see him, but, because again, he's just a phenomenal dentist. Yes.
Are you saying that most dentists still are using mercury?
No, I'm not saying that. No. What I'm saying is there are still dentists that will use it, but more importantly, a lot of people have mercury in their mouths, right? If you immigrated to this country, I have a lot of Russian clients that I've worked with or some other ethnic groups, and when they come in, they've not had dental work at all, or they've had very poor health care, and so they'll go to the dentist and they'll get their mouths filled with this stuff because it was cheap. Now, I don't know if that's happening now, but I'm talking about clients that I'm working with when they first came, 20 years ago. So dentists might not be, no, they are using it, but maybe not to the same level that they were. The issue is what's in your mouth now. And there has to be a plan created to get it out. Remember, when you're downstream and you have symptoms and you're reacting to the model by taking a drug or a supplement, you're not really fixing the toxin that's creating that problem. That's where you have to go upstream and take those things out when it's appropriate. In order for the body to get well, you got to remove the things that irritate the body. Does that make sense? So it has to be a part of the game plan. At some point, there has to be a plan to have those taken out. Yes?
Well, about 20 years ago, after I had cancer, they decided that I was allergic to metals, and they went in and removed every one of them and put porcelains in.
Uh-huh. Right.
And that was like 6 months after my cancer surgery.
Yeah, see this? So one of the things I teach or we talk about with our clients is that if you look back in someone's history and you look back at, so we look at when did you start manifesting certain symptoms, and we look back 1 to 3 years prior to that, that's when there was a major trigger in your life. Be it something like a physical, emotional, or a chemical. There's always a major stressor that comes into your life and it manifests within that 1 to 3 year window. So we always find that. There's always something that triggered it. It wasn't the only thing, but it was the thing that pushed you over the edge. It's the thing that caused the bucket to start overflowing. Can you visualize that?
I think that just poked holes throughout my body.
It can do lots, again.
At that point is when I started having weak nails, hair loss, weight
Right.
gain, can't lose it.
See, that is a testimony to what I just said. Don't go get your amalgams removed, because unless your body's ready for it, it will make you sick. Okay, so there it is. All right, next one is lead. By the way, there are about 20 different heavy metals we discuss, but lead and mercury are the two most common. The number one source of lead is your mother. Why? Because lead has an affinity for the bones. It's a nasty metal. It's like uranium. The body does not like it, so it pushes it into the hardest tissue possible, which are what? Your bones. So mom, of course, does what? It gives baby lots of good things, but including that, it also gives calcium, and as it releases calcium out of the bones, it releases this lead. And lead passes on. So that's why we say your number one source of lead toxicity is your mother. Now, in our environment, I think we've done an okay job of eliminating lead. But homes that were built up until 1978, there was lead in the paint, there was lead in the pipes, galvanized pipes, there's lead in gasoline, there was lead in makeups, there was lead in lots of different places.
Are you get rid of our mothers now?
No, don't do that. I'm going to be careful. I'm going to plead the fifth on that. No, we love our mothers. It's not their fault. Cigarettes, another source. This is what I'm trying to explain to you, is that you can be born with a bucket that's somewhat full and you had nothing to do with it, right? So it's important to identify and understand, do you have these certain toxins? Because you've got to figure out if that's the case, then they have to be removed, okay? So do you think it makes sense to do something like that, a metals test? Yeah. Would you, yeah? Now there's different ways to do it. The most accurate way is a provocative urine test. There are places that do hair analysis, and it's not as accurate because it's not provoking it out of the tissues. It's just showing you what's showing up in the hair. So the levels in the hair are not going to necessarily be accurate for what's in the body. So that's a test that I would say almost all our clients we have done. We want to know if you have lead. We want to know if you have mercury. We want to know a lot of things. I had a client who had a weird muscle twitching condition. They never figured out what was wrong with it. He had various barium swallow imaging done. So you drink that stuff, right? Well, if you look at the correlation between barium toxicity, one of the side effects is a neurological twitch. And as soon as we started chelating that out of it, and when I say chelating, I don't chelate, okay? I teach people what to do with natural things and how to get it out. And as the stuff started coming out, those twitches went away. So you have to know what you're looking at. This is where playing crime scene investigator is important. You got to really look upstream. You got to go as deep as you can until you find it. Because if you don't, you're never going to get well. Does that make sense? So that's one of the things that we would do. The number 4 is BPA. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. It's used as a softener in plastics, and that's why you find it in makeups as well. Studies show that low doses can affect the thyroid. And then number 5 are halogens. Halogens are things like fluoride, bromine, and chlorine. Now, these halogens are what they compete with iodine. When you think about the thyroid, T1 or T4 and T3, the number that 3 indicates how many iodine molecules are attached to that protein. So if I'm throwing fluoride or bromine or chlorine into my system, what is it doing with iodine? Is it competing with iodine? Yes, it is. Do you think that there's a chance that you might actually have a physiological effect on the thyroid if you have more of this in your system than you should? Do you think that possibly you could get goiters or build tumors in your thyroid because of this? In fact, you know what? I know there's such a hot subject on the discussion of fluoride, right? Fluoride fixes my teeth. A lot of people will say, oh, it's okay. Others will say it's not okay. I'm here to tell you it's not okay, and I got the evidence to provide it. In fact, today, interestingly enough, there was an article just published on that. The way they generate fluoride, they use a very toxic chemical. They've never measured the effects on the body, right? Never. And again, what is fluoride? It's reactionary. Why am I developing a cavity to begin with? It's got to do with the microbiomes in your mouth. It's the bacteria, the natural bacteria in your mouth. So one of the things I would recommend you do right away is change your toothpaste to a non-fluoridated toothpaste. There's lots of great options. I can't really get into specific brands, except don't buy Tom's, because Tom's is filled with other chemicals. But I would suggest don't buy Tom's, because again, there's other things in it that are not healthy to the body, right? But there are other brands that are fantastic. And if you're wondering where do I go and get those, for me, I go to New Seasons. I like to support the local market. I'll spend a few dollars more for the toothpaste, but I know I'm putting the right stuff in my mouth. Okay, fluoride is nasty. It's nasty. It's okay. Chlorine. If you're taking a shower, right, or if you're drinking water that's chlorinated, that's a problem. My suggestion would be immediately filter your water. You can be very low cost. You can get a filtration system installed, let's say, under your sink. But if you're willing and able, it might make sense to do a full house filtration system to get rid of it all. Because listen, if you're in the shower, do you think you're absorbing it? Yes. If you're doing dishes and your dishwasher is running that water through there, do you think that chemical is getting on your dishes? So you have to think about these things. So my recommendation is this: low cost, filter your drinking water, and 2, get a shower filter. They're cheap. Go put that on your shower. At least you're doing something to mitigate your exposure to these toxins.
No more swimming pools?
Well, that's a great question. Great question. No, I'm not saying no swimming. There are things you can do to protect yourself when you go into the swimming pool. Now, the owner of the swimming pool might not like it, because there'll be a layer of fat in the pool. But using coconut oil is a great way of barrier to protect yourself. And, if you can get in a pool that is salt water and there is no chlorine in it, which is rare. Even saltwater pools still have some chlorine in them. So it's rare to find. But let's just be honest. Most of us, how many of us swim, every day for an hour? Like, it's rare. It doesn't happen. Most people shower, however, every day, right? And it's that heat that makes it more of a problem, because it's a gas and then you inhale it. That's the big thing. Yes, your skin can absorb it. Yes, in a hot shower, your pores open and you absorb it more readily. When you're in a pool, you can argue that the pores are not necessarily as open and you're not necessarily absorbing it as much. I've had clients that have not quit swimming and they do great. For me, I'm very sensitive to those types of things, so I don't get into pools that are chlorinated. I can't. My kids hate that about me. My grandparents, their grandparents go in the pool with them instead. So. So those are the things that you can start looking at. And look at some of the stuff you're consuming. Like, we talk about soft drinks, right? And everyone can agree that soft drinks aren't really good for you. The worst of them all, the worst, is Mountain Dew. It's got so much stuff in it. Phosphoric acid that will pull calcium out of your bones. Osteopenia is becoming quite common in kids. Osteopenia. Are you serious? And these are the things that will drive that. But not to mention the things that are in them that will compete with iodine. That doesn't mean that you now go and start taking iodine, okay? Like I said earlier, if you start supplementing with iodine and you do it too fast and you do it too quickly and you do it at the wrong time, that's when a thyroid storm can set in. You've got to be careful. We've had many clients that have come in and have said, hey, my chiropractor recommended I take this iodine, natural, kelp, whatever, and they went into this horrible, thyroid storm. You've got to be careful. Remember, the internet is the bathroom all of cyberspace. Anybody can write whatever they want. And I understand you're desperate to do something to get well, but you got to make sure that you understand the pros and the cons. And I know that it's always hard to determine that on your own. That's why there are people like myself who can help you through that. So, all right. Those are some good things to start working on. Would you agree? They're not expensive and they're not difficult. It's a choice. I love it when a client comes in, and sees us and they say, hey, you know what? I went right away and bought new toothpaste and I did this. I love that because it means they're taking action. Are you toxic? Well, there's a test that we do it actually can be done in office or it can be done online. Remember, we are virtual. 95% of our clients are all over the country and world. So this particular test does not tell us what toxins you have. It doesn't say you have lead. It doesn't say you have fluoride. But what it does is it gives us a category or sense of how these toxins are affecting your visual ability to see contrast. So the grays, the whites, and the blacks. So what I do is when a client comes in, one of the things they have to do is fill out some paperwork, and there's a component to that where there's actually scores that are created. And we look at that and we look at the visual contrast sensitivity. Inevitably, where they were highest on the intake, they were highest on the visual contrast, which would say you're high for metals. So in that particular case, the argument can be made, let's go ahead and run a heavy metal urine profile to figure out which of the metals are driving your issue. Does that make sense? So we're not just running tests for the hell of running tests. We run it based on what we believe creates, there's value in actually doing a test. Do you agree with that? Think about this one, just to kind of hammer that in. How many of you have been tested for vitamin D? Good. Then given a recommendation to take vitamin D, right? Because 85% of Americans are deficient. How many of you have had frequent follow-ups on your vitamin D? Only 2 or 3 of you. Every 6 months. You have to ask for it. So why is it then a doctor would order that test and tell you you're low, tell you to supplement, and then never, ever follow up? What sense does that make? Does it? No. Most Americans are vitamin D deficient, almost 85%. And we're making wrong recommendations. Here's a maintenance dose recommendation. 25 pounds of body weight equals 1,000 IU of vitamin D. So if I weigh 100 pounds, that's 4,000 IU of maintenance. But what if you're low? What if you're an 18 or a 16, which I see all the time? And you need to be where? Most lab reference intervals say over 30, right? It's not 30. It's 60 to 90. That's where you really need to be for the body to work well and work right. Vitamin D is involved in so many different things. There's no way you're going to get up to 60 or higher by taking 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 IU as a therapeutic dose. Do you understand that? So if you, for now, like if you are taking a vitamin D, first thing you want to do is make sure it's a good quality vitamin D. Make sure it's not filled with fillers. Make sure it's D3. And make sure you're taking the appropriate dose, just from a maintenance standpoint, right? As it relates to therapeutic, that's where you have to sit down with someone who knows what they're talking about and give you that specific recommendation. But if you want to try to make I don't want you to take vitamin D because you think, I don't want you to have a false sense of security because someone told you to take it but didn't give you the right dose. So go with that. 25 pounds of body weight equals 1,000 IU. That's a maintenance dose. Yes?
Is that vitamin D3?
D3, yeah.
What if you have a doctor that's telling you to supplement and also go tanning to up your D?
Great question. Right. Okay. Gosh, you get tanning.
Oh dear God.
I was just interviewed by John Erickson. You know who that is on the radio station? And so actually that interview will be airing tomorrow at 7 a.m. on the Eagle and then on 103.3. And anyway, he asked me a lot of these questions. Not all of it's going to be on the air, but one of them was, what's your opinion on sunscreen and what's your opinion on sun exposure? Let me ask you something. How long has the human race been around? Okay. Now, believe it or not, if you're Christian or you're not Christian, you believe in God, you don't believe in God, you believe in evolution, who cares? My point is this. When you look at melanoma and the rate of incline in terms of how common it is, and the relation to sun burning, you know what the studies show? 20 years, right? 20-year study. They show that the folks that developed melanoma, the melanoma developed in areas where they were not exposed to the sun. Think about that for a second. So when you're exposed to the sun, what does it do? One, it does produce vitamin D. Number two, it produces cholesterol sulfate. Cholesterol sulfate is what gives the heart energy. It's what cleans the blood vessels, right? It cleans them out. That's what you need for the body to work efficiently. When they look at the Mediterranean lifestyle, they've always given value to their diet, which is important. The high-fat diets, the good fats, the olive oils, the avocados, the coconuts, etc. But one thing they don't talk about a lot is that sun exposure. Now, what we need to understand is, as humans, what do we tend to do? If something's good, we do what? We abuse it. So we go down to Mexico and we bake ourselves, right? That's not okay. But being in the sun for 15 to 25 minutes a day, as much skin exposure as you possibly can get without scaring the neighbors, is important. Because you're going to get so much more than just taking a vitamin D. Does that make sense? And we don't live in a part of the world where that's easy to do, except for the last two months. So take advantage, okay? All right. Number 3, solution. The gut is a cause of inflammation and turns genes on and off. So how is your gut? Well, again, we talk a lot about leaky gut. Leaky gut, what does that mean? In the small intestine, you have these, you can see in this picture right here, there's these microvilli that are tight junctions together. And what happens is things like heavy metals and mold spores and certain types of bacteria and gluten, which is a protein that gets so much attention, and it's a real issue, causes a wedging effect. And that's what, when it wedges, like you can see here, things start to leak out of your gut and they end up in your blood where they don't belong, and your body creates sensitivities. So if you think about food sensitivities, where at one point in your life you didn't have that sensitivity, but now all of a sudden you do, well, what changed? This is one of the reasons. You develop an intolerance, then you create an immune abnormality, and the body then starts to attack that. It says, uh-oh, it's not good for me, and then it creates this autoimmune condition. So you have to look at the gut. The gut is the starting point for most conditions and most diseases, especially autoimmune in nature. And it's the things that we're doing to the gut that are creating that. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I just have a statement here. Leaky gut, along with food allergies and intolerance, are now a known cause of autoimmune conditions and thyroid conditions. Some of the major causes that create gut problems are going to be things like heavy metals, glyphosate. Glyphosate is the key ingredient in Roundup. Okay? It's nasty stuff. Causes cancer like up the kahoo. If you look at studies that have been done on this, in Argentina there was a study done where they started spraying the fields with this. The rate of cancer went up proportionally as it did with the spraying of those fields. So if you're out there spraying, glyphosates, or you live on a golf course and they're spraying glyphosates, do you think potentially that could be affecting you? Absolutely. Don't believe me. Go research this stuff if you don't buy it. Also, what about the new grain, the hybridization, or the genetically modified components to that? That was a question that came up in the interview as well. Grains have been hybridized, and they've been crossbred, and now have been turned into what we call super sugars, which have this toxic gluten, right? This Dr. Norman Borlaug, he developed the high-yield dwarf wheat. It's this small wheat. The reason he developed that is because it's less susceptible to climate changes, and the argument was that we're going to use less herbicides and insecticides, which is also not true, right? The problem with this is that it's highly addictive. It's high in something called amylopectin A. That amylopectin A acts on the opioid receptors in your brain. Have you ever tried to quit eating bread? And within a day or two, you're like, where's my gun or where's my knife? I'm going to shoot somebody, right? It's because you're so addicted to that. You've become addicted to that food, and it's because of this. But the nasty thing about it, of course, is that it becomes so addictive and it's so inflammatory to the body that, it's like that double-edged sword. How do you break out of that cycle? There's ways to do that. I don't know if you know this, but eating 2 pieces of toast raises your blood sugar higher and longer than drinking a can of Pepsi. And what is the standard diet in America? 2 pieces of toast, right? Or one of my favorites is if you're diabetic, or you have high cholesterol, what do they tell you to eat more of? Grains, oatmeal, right? Guess what? The studies show oatmeal keeps your blood sugars higher and longer. So if you want to become hormone sensitive, if you want to become a fat burner, not a sugar burning machine. Sugar burning machines are people who do this, like a jet engine. You go strong and then you crash. But fat burning machines are like diesel engines. They just keep going. What's the first thing you should do in the morning? Eat fat. That's the first thing you should do. Good, healthy fat. Good, healthy fat, avocados, or coconut oil, or MCT oil, or grass-fed butters, cholesterol, eggs. These are great sources of those fats. I really want to keep the questions because I want to finish on time if it's okay, and I'll come back to your question at the end.
I was just going to say, he just went through diabetic classes.
Yes.
Grains, they told him to stay away from grains.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. But if you go to the American Diabetes Association on top, it still talks about grains. GMO grains such as BT corn have been shown to put holes directly in your gut. This drives inflammation throughout the body. Butchers say that guts of GMO-fed animals stink or discolored and are very, very thin. This is a study that was recently done. 168 just weaned pigs, half were fed organic, half were fed GMO. The study showed that GMO-fed pigs were up to 4 times more likely to get severe stomach inflammation on a GMO diet than those that did not. Here's another thing you should know about. Is the human becoming a pesticide factory? Well, yes. We're producing something called BT corn. BT is a big mouthful, okay? But basically what it does, it's been genetically modified to produce a pesticide, because they were using that as an argument to use less insecticides and pesticides. But let's think about this for a second. If I'm consuming this corn and it's going into an environment that's filled with what? What's in your gut? Bacteria, right? The friendly bacteria. And this thing is activated by bacteria. Do you think it makes a distinguishment between the good and the bad bacteria? Absolutely not. And this would start to drive a dysbiosis in the gut, which then does what? It triggers this cascading effect. It should upset you. Scientists are finding that pesticide-producing DNA in our friendly gut bacteria. Yes, it is now possible that you're becoming a pesticide factory. Here's an example of a study that was done with these rats. This is 4 and 7 months later. These tumors, this is strictly on a GMO diet. So I know there's been a lot of hype about this in the media and about labeling our food and this and that and the other. I know some people buy into it, others don't. Let me ask you something. Does it make sense to mess with nature? Ever? Have we ever shown in the history of the human existence that when we screw around with nature that we actually do a better job? No, there's no such evidence. So you really need to start thinking about this. I tell my clients, when you're looking at your food, look at your food's source of food, right? It's not what you're eating, it's what they ate. If that makes sense. So if they're not, like cows, for example, if you eat meat, which is good if it's grass-fed, grass-finished, that's the language you need to be asking. If you go to a butcher and you ask for grass-fed meat, make sure you ask if it's grass-finished, because there's a difference. Grass-fed is now the big hype thing. Everybody's about grass-fed, right? But they grain-finish the cows to give it that marble. Well, that counter produces the effects of the grass-fed meat. Grass-fed, grass-finished meats. There are butchers locally. Even Whole Foods does actually have that. Some New Seasons do. You just have to ask, is this grass-fed, grass-finished? That's the language you need to ask, okay? Corn-fed is the worst thing you can be doing. That's what drives inflammation. Corn is high in omega-3. It's 98% of corn has been genetically modified in the United States.
There's a butcher off of Lombard that has...
Yeah, lots of sources. We don't have time for that now, but know that these are the questions you need to start asking. So if you're on that bandwagon already, grass-fed and grass-finished is really important, okay? All right, so as you can see, we talked a lot today about a lot of different things, and I think it's important that you don't get caught up with the tests, too much of the tests. It's more important to understand what have you been doing over the course of your 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, anyone over 80 here? No, okay, 80 years of life. And figure out what those things are and remove them. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? So in order to make a difference, you've got to do things that necessarily don't look to you like they fall within the box. You got to go outside the box to get those results. And you should never do anything out of hype. You should never do anything out of emotion. That's how we make decisions as humans. We need to look at it objectively. When we work with clients, there is no hype. It's objective. Here's the deal. We go through it. We recheck. Okay, let's recheck. Let's recheck. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling great. Yes, but let's keep rechecking. Because symptoms are the first thing to show up and the last thing to... the last thing to show up and the first thing to disappear. Just because your symptoms disappear does not mean that the body is under control. Do you understand that? Do not use symptoms as a yardstick. If I have cancer, I might not even feel it. Do you understand that? Or if I have cavities, I don't necessarily feel it. So symptoms are not the way. All of you have symptoms, so I understand that's easy to be motivated. Okay. I just throw this up here as another example. Mona, I should say, not Monica. Mona came to one of these seminars, and what's her number one priority? Lose weight. It's all she cared about. She goes, Werner, I understand all of what you're talking about. It makes so much sense. There's a lot of science there. I'm all for it. I don't really care. I just want to lose weight. And that's the case. I will say, though, I did tell her this too, that we're not a weight loss clinic. That's not what we do. Our objective is not to put you through a program to lose weight. Yes, everyone loses weight, but it's a byproduct of doing what? Figuring out what's going on here, right? That's, in my opinion, more sustainable than doing the traditional weight loss programs. You lose some weight, and then you rebound, and you go through this yo-yo experience. How many of you have done that? I mean, isn't it tiring? And you become more cynical and you become more suspect because you go, well, how is this any different? I've gone through this and it's another thing and another. My only thing to say to that is this. Figure out what's right for you. Figure out something that's sustainable, not only to help you lose the weight, not only to help you reduce your symptoms, but more importantly to allow it for you to maintain that for the rest of your life. That's the key. Those are the things that you need to look at. So a couple of things that I want you to do, okay? We're at the end. I promise I'm not going to have you do anything crazy right now. I just want to take 1 minute of your time because I really want you to get as much value out of this as possible. And I really want you to start thinking about this. This is an exercise we do with our clients. It's an exercise I do every day with myself. And it's something that I believe is going to provide value for you today. So I promise there won't be any, I'm not going to hypnotize you. I'm not going to do anything crazy like that. I just want you to take a minute and I want you to forget about the rest of your day, just for a minute or two, okay? I want you to clear your minds. And I also want you to take out all self-limiting belief systems out of your mind. I want you to forget about that. And I want you to close your eyes, every single one of you. And I want to make sure you're all closed. Go ahead, close your eyes. Promise I'm not going to do anything crazy. Okay. All right. I want every single one of you to kind of think about this. If nothing changes in your current journey in terms of your health, what do you see or where do you see yourself in 6 months from now? How about a year out? Again, you're going down the same journey you're going right now. You're not making any changes. How about 5 years from now? If you really allow yourself to go there, keep your eyes closed. This is very powerful. You should feel something. You should feel more pain, more anger, more irritation, right? Are we feeling that? Yes? Okay, good. Now, keep your eyes closed. I want you to do something very simple here. What if you go home and start making some of the changes we talked about today? What do you see potentially your body or your health looking like 6 months from now? How about a year from now? Or even 5 years? Think about everything that in your life, everything. Allow yourself to go there. We as adults, we forget how to dream, right? We tell our kids to stop daydreaming. I think that's very dangerous. All right. Okay, has everybody gotten to a place in their minds? You know what? I can't test. I can't. You can open your eyes. I know I can't make sure you did or not, but you know what? I'll tell you what. For those of you that really allow yourselves to go there, to be vulnerable to yourself, and you looked yourself in the mirror and you started to create a picture of where you want to be, let me tell you something. That is a choice. What you saw is a choice. It's really a choice. I know it doesn't seem always practical or easy because you've been through a lot. The reality of it is it is a choice. And we're here to help if you want our help. If you're tired of it, you're sick and tired of it, and you want a coach, we're here. And again, I might not be the right person for you. That's okay. I'm not offended. But for those of you who...
Other coaches?
With me? I'm the head coach, so to speak. And then I have sub-coaches that help me. So we have different roles in our company. I focus on the clinical side of things. And you know, when we work with clients, you get my cell phone number. You get the health coach that you're working with, their cell number. Because we are intimately connected. I have clients that I meet with every 2 to 4 weeks, either, again, mostly virtually, right? Because I got clients all over. But I get calls and I get text messages and I get emails because we're connected with that client. We want the best for you. We want to serve you. But I will say this, I'm very picky with who I work with. I will not work with someone who's negative. I will not work with someone who's a naysayer. I will not work with someone who won't take action. I will only work with people that will take action. I will not work with people who make excuses. It's one thing to listen and be compassionate, but it's another thing to say enough's enough. Would you agree with that? Right. So anyway, enough said. So for those of you who have additional questions that I did not answer today, I'm going to stick around and be happy to just answer those questions for you. As you know, we're recording this. If there's anybody here who wants to say a little something about if you enjoyed this, let the camera gentleman know and he'll be happy to just, if you're up for it. You don't have to, okay? But other than that, for those of you who have additional questions, come up front and see me. For the rest of you who are ready to take the next step and want our help, please see Christy in the back. She can get you scheduled, get you the paperwork, and go from there. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.